logistic regression. I'm so excited because I really was looking forward to this one. So with no further ado, Edwin, you're up.
Yeah, hi everyone. Yes, let me share the screen so I can get started. Can you see it?
Yes.
Oh, cool. Okay. So yeah, today I'm going to talk about the alternatives to logistic regression, and we are going to base on cross-sectional studies because it's what most commonly we are dealing with in biomedical data, or the data that we're dealing with every day. So yeah, whenever I am presenting, if you have any more addition or comment, please make sure you can interact me anytime and chip in so that we can all learn. So we start with just an overview of logistic regression. I think most of us are familiar with it. So it's a model that models the probability of an outcome with a presence of predictor variables using a logic link function. So it in binary outcomes, as in if the outcome is there or not, or maybe if, for example, it's a disease, if a patient has a disease or not, or the odds of getting a disease or not, or if it's death or alive, something like that. So this is considered as the best model, the most common model in binomial outcomes, as I've said, but there is also some problems with it because the model estimates the log odds or the odds ratio as the effect measure. And sometimes we might be interested in other measures, and depending on the design of our outcome, design of our study, we might be misleading to talk about the odds. Okay, so the logistic regression model, for cross-sectional studies, it is fitted for rare events, and it was initially adapted for rare events. Like, for example, in case control studies, although in cross-sectional it can be applied, but the events has to be rare. So a little bit more about the measures of effects I've been talking about. In logistic regression, as I've said, we use odds ratios, but in other study design, we can use, like, for example, for cross-section, we can use prevalence ratio. For cohort studies, we have like relative risk rate ratio, hazard ratio, incidence rate ratio. Odds rate, or for case control studies or cross-section studies, rare event, we can use odds ratios. So as I've said, if the event is rare, so the odds could closely be approximated with the relative risk, okay, if it's maybe less than 10%. But for a common disease, the odds will overestimate the relative risk. And even when you run a classical logistic regression, it will overestimate the effect, either towards more than 1 if it's an adverse effect, or less than 1 if it's the protective effect. So it can overestimate in any of the directions. So this signified the need to turn on to some alternatives. Yeah, this is just an example of this was the I think it's for lung cancer. And as you can see, you can calculate it, but as you can see, yes, if you calculate the odds, there will be 6 mathematically, and the relative risk will be 3. So here we see that because the outcome was common, they also overestimated the effect compared to the risk. So the alternatives that I'll discuss that I've seen that are common are these 6 of them, and I've arranged them in an order so that maybe it can bring a little bit more sense. Is there a question or comment? Sorry.
I guess was just someone with the mic open, and when you can carry on.
Okay, so these are the alternatives that I've seen that are commonly used, and I've arranged them in order so that they can make maybe you can have an intuition when you come across them or want to apply them. I've just tried to talk about them briefly, but I won't do any coding in this session or any deep statistics. I'll just keep it as simple as possible so that you can get the concept. So we start with a modified Cox hazard regression. And this was proposed by Lee and Chia, of which they wanted to use the Cox regression to analyze the binary outcome in cross-sectional studies. So with this, when you assume that there is a constant, because we know that the Cox regression is models the time to event and modifies the constant hazards, which it doesn't model, but it accounts for how the constant hazard can be modified by additional covariates in the model or additional covariates in your study. So here, when you assume that there is a constant risk period, or you assign a constant risk period to every individual in the study, like in a cross-sectional study now, the hazard rate ratio will be will be approximately equal to maybe the cumulative incidence ratio or the prevalence ratio in the cross-sectional studies. That's why they were able to apply it. But if the outcome was rare, the variance would have been very close to the binomial or logistic regression. But here, when the outcome is common, there is a problem that the variance become overinflated or inflated. Okay, so with this one, you can get the unbiased estimate, as I've said, if you put the constant time to everyone. But the issue is now the variance will be inflated, and as a result, the standard error and the confidence interval would be wider than they would be in the Poisson regression. And another problem with this modified Cox is that it uses a log-link function and not a logit-link function, which can also bring problems, and also it assumes the distribution is Poisson, not binomial as in the logistic model. So another approach is the use of log-binomial regression. Now, remember we said that the Cox regression used the Poisson. Now, this log-binomial is a little bit different because it uses the correct distribution of the binary data, which is binomial, but it still uses the log-link function. So this solves the problems of variance inflation, but because of this link function, it has the problem of non-convergence, we say, or the model not converging. As you see here, when you use log-link function, it constrains the probability to either be greater or equal to 0 or less than 1, but not 0 or 1 as we are used to in the logit function in the logistic regression model. So that also brings the problem of the failure to converge or non-convergence of which there are some approaches that have been proposed that I won't go into detail with, like the iterative weighted least squares or the inverse probability treatment weights or the copy method. But if you see the papers, they say even with this method, still there is a problem of non-convergence. It might be an issue. So as I said, it takes care of the problem of the confidence intervals and the variance, but there is a problem with non-convergence, especially in the presence of continuous covariates, and if the prevalence is very, very high. So with that, there is another method that was proposed that was negative binomial regression, but this one is mostly applied in count data or count variables, like let's say number of days absent in school, maybe number of days in the hospital, yeah. And now, if you want to check or to have an effect like a rate, you can use this in a cross-sectional study. And its advantages is that it approximates the binomial distribution, especially when there is overdispersion, but it uses also the log link and the Poisson distribution. Still uses the log link and the Poisson, which may inflate the variance, as we said earlier. So with this now, there was a proposed, it was proposed that we use the Poisson, a modified Poisson with robust standard errors to take care of the issue of the variance or the inflated variance over dispersion. So as I've said here, this is the modified Poisson regression, which is with robust standard errors. So it was proposed by Zhou, of which he incorporated robust standard errors in the Poisson regression. And this was so that he can compensate the problems of the variance inflation we have seen in earlier models and also non-convergence that we have seen in the log binomial. But still with this, he also assumed with this Poisson, it assumes a Poisson distribution in this model and uses also a log function. So if he didn't apply the RIC, the Lee and Chia modified Cox in this model, they usually have the same output or the same effects. They will calculate the same effects, but with robust standard errors, it will compensate the inflation or the inflated variances we see. Yeah. So yeah, this I've already talked about. The disadvantage is, yes, it uses a log link and Poisson distribution, not which is incorrect or statistically incorrect in this outcome, which is fine.
Edwin, can I jump real quickly into this?
Yes, please.
If you we'll talk about it or not, it doesn't matter. But one of my experiences with modified Poisson regression with robust standard error is that you need a large sample so you can produce those results. Because since you're assuming that a binary outcome can be used as a count, if you try to use that with a small sample, it won't work, especially if you're going to stratify to multiple independent variables. Because when we're doing this modeling, we're going to create very, very specific categories. So every single predictor will be aligned and create a prevalence, and then it will account as this Poisson regression with robust standard error. So have you seen anything like this, like the need of a large sample to do it? Because in my experience, when it's less than, I would say, 500, it won't get a good fitting It just won't.
Okay. Okay. I think the papers I've read, they didn't talk about sample size.
Yeah.
I've only seen it in, I think in Bayesian. I think they said in general that sample size for correlation studies have just to be sufficient as the model assumes, but I didn't know it could be, it has to be that large enough, like
Yeah.
more than 500. Yeah, this I didn't observe. Maybe I'll check it out, but yeah, I think it's a really good observation. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Okay, so
yeah, go ahead.
okay, I think we can in the end we can discuss which one of the models to use, or which one is the best, and maybe which one is. And I'll also talk about what the papers recommend or what the papers suggest for now. But as you can see in this table, I'm not sure if I'm sorry, it's a little bit poor in quality, but you can see they did this was a common outcome, and they compared the log binomial, the modified Cox, and the Poisson with the robust standard errors. And if you observe, you can take time to observe the effects and the 95 confidence intervals here, but I'm not sure if I have a point. Oh, yeah. Can you see the point?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Cool. So as you can see, both in the logistic, in the normal logistic, both in the unadjusted and adjusted, the odds are really overestimated. The effect is overestimated. And but if you compare with these three models, the log binomial, the modified Cox, and the Poisson with robust standard errors, you would appreciate that the effects are almost the same. In the adjusted and unadjusted, they're a little bit different. But you see, with this statistical program, it gives a note here in the log binomial. It gives a note that the convergence was questionable, and these results may not be reliable. Yeah, but when you compare the modified Cox and the Poisson, you see that the Poisson with robust standard errors had narrower confidence intervals. Yeah, so it took a little bit into account the dispersion, so it produces a little bit of narrower confidence intervals. Yeah. So
So Edwin, I
yeah.
also can you talk a little bit about the differences in the data? So what you talked a little bit about being for approximation to account data. So what kind of scenarios in terms of the binomial distribution variation are we to try one of these additional models?
With this, it's basically we have you have data, you have a binary outcome, like if somebody has a disease or not, if they have, but unfortunately, fortunately, it's a common outcome. So it's like the prevalence maybe it's 60% or 40, right? If you're using a logistic regression approach, it will, here the message is it will overestimate your effect, and you have to be very careful when you're interpreting the results because it might be a little bit misleading. So this is like another way of approaching of modeling this data but getting a little bit of precise estimates, more, I could say more precise estimates that you can interpret them, maybe if it's the prevalence ratio or the incidence ratio, or if it's, you can interpret it as maybe a risk, let's say, as a risk, at least, if the outcome is common. But I'm just here, I was just comparing the three approaches we have seen so far. And we see that maybe the Poisson with robust standard errors is one of them, maybe the most, I think it's the better approach. Or people also use the Cox with the robust standard errors. You can also use the modified Cox with robust standard errors. In this case, it will give a closer results with the Poisson with the robust standard errors. But I think the issue of sample size I didn't really see in the papers. Maybe I'll try to check if if the sample size is an issue, or which samples should be fit for which model. So this is just what I was talking about in table 2, in that the above table. And as you can see, it overestimated, as I've said, the crude and the adjusted effects. They are in the log binomial is somewhat different from those estimated and modified, but the log binomial incurred the problem of non-convergence, as we have seen, which it issued a warning, yes. And with the two models, the Poisson and the modified Cox, the effects were almost the same, but the CIs were narrow and the robust standard error compared to the Cox. So
it's really very interesting.
Yes,
Edwin, and
yes,
I think this is something we can consider exploring in more detail each model to see really if we can create kind of like a flow of when to use each model based on the findings. I do notice that the effect that is being reported on the table is the prevalence ratio. I would be curious to see how it performs against other metrics, but definitely very interesting.
Okay, because this is like we based on the cross-sectional data with like just the simple ones we are used to, the prevalence, right? The simple ones. But yeah, I think we should we can go into detail, maybe each model later on, and continue this discussion. It'll be really interesting. So in this, we come to now to the question: is the modified Poisson with robust standard errors the perfect as the alternative to the logistic for a common outcome? It seemed so, but we recall that there's still disadvantages with this Poisson with robust standard errors, which it has a model misspecification, as I said. It uses a log link with the Poisson distribution, and it can produce the probability greater than 1 because of its distribution. And they are not clear, the writers of this, or they are not clear on how they calculated the RSE in this model. So they say it's still ongoing anyway. The research and studies with these models is still ongoing. So yeah. So there is another approach, of which this is if you want marginal effects. I hope everyone is a little bit familiar with marginal effects, but this is logistic with if you want like a population average effect, or you want an effect on overall population, you can use this approach, which is it assumes the model is correctly specified, and no uncontrolled confounding and no measurement errors. So this will, if you want, or you have a question and you want to calculate or to determine a marginal effect or a population average effect, for example, of a disease, maybe if I was interested in knowing maybe the prevalence of, let's say, maybe anemia in the whole Arusha region based on a certain, based on a random sample, I can use a marginal effect to a marginal model, a logistic marginal model, which will have a little bit more precise or population estimated effects. But maybe we can talk about marginal models more if it's not very clear. But sometimes the disadvantage with this is sometimes it's not meaningful because it's a very generalizable effect or generalizable estimate. So sometimes it might be not be of interest in maybe in people, maybe in clinicians from KCMC, they would want to know what is the effect at KCMC and not maybe the whole of Tanzania or Arusha region, the average effect. So with that, we will talk about the Bayesian logistic regression, but first, let's discuss a little bit about these frequent distant Bayesian approaches so that you can have a little bit of idea. But the frequent distant approach is the one that we are used to, the one that we do in our day-to-day life. Which we have maybe some assumptions, we model with some assumptions, and of course they might be questionable, but we model with assumptions on our data and also on our model. So, but as I've said, that in the frequentist, they estimate the parameter which maximizes the probability of the data. But in the Bayesian now, this is I've seen they also call it as subjective. They're not, what they do is they specify the likelihood of the data given the parameters, of which the simplest way to say it is they will have a prior defined parameter and distribution, and use that to determine the posterior or the real distribution and the data of the data, as in it's subjective, so they choose a statistician or a Bayesianist can choose a parameter, can determine the parameter prior based on prior knowledge, and use that to calculate the parameters of the data. So as you have seen here, they say that they calculate the posterior distribution that combines the likelihood of the prior with the data in formal way using the Bayes theorem. Let me use the notation so that this formula can be. So this is the posterior, or the one that you are going to determine the parameter, the probability of the parameter given the data, which is the product of this is the parameter that is subjective, that is determined by the statistician multiplied by the likelihood obtained in the data. And this is just a constant, which is standardization or normalization constant, so that to limit this probability to be equal to 1 or to be within 1, because probabilities can be only between 0 and 1. Yeah, I'm sorry if it's a little bit more complicated, but it's just you're determining, you choose your parameter before based on your prior knowledge, and then you apply it to get you approximate it to get the probability of the parameter now from the data. So you can always change the prior, this p theta, the prior parameters can always be changed depending on how you see the data behaves. So this makes it a little bit, this makes the model a little more flexible, I guess. Makes the model more flexible, and it also does not rely on large sample sizes. So you can do it even in small sample sizes. Yes, and it uses also available prior information, I've said, of the parameters, and it's more flexible, and it can incorporate even hierarchical multi-level structure data, maybe if there are clusters in the data, there is clustering. Yes. So this is just a summary of all the brief summary of all the approaches we have seen before, all the 6 approaches. This can be maybe for reference, and it can a little bit make you understand which one maybe you want to use. And in conclusion, you can see that generally, I can say that from what I have seen in these models, that first, in your study, you have to check, you have to see the interpretability of the effect is more important than whether it can be computed or not. So even if you're going with logistic regression or any other method, you have to be careful when you're interpreting and make sure you're not misleading your audience, especially the non-epidemiologist ones. And we should not use odds ratio as an approximation of the risk if the prevalence is common or is greater than 10%. And even if the alternative logistic method exists, there is some challenges as we have seen here. And with each model, and no model is perfect. But I see the best approach is to do maybe like a sensitivity analysis, where you can test 3 models and see which one behaves is the better fit, by using like those archaic and Bayesian criterias. Sometimes you can also check the estimates that the model gives, yeah, as how are they, so that that can also guide you to choose which model you want to use, or which model would, because you might find that the archaic and Bayesian criteria are close. For example, with the Poisson regression with robust standard errors, maybe in the log-binomial, or maybe in the classical logistic regression, but you find that the estimates are better with maybe logistic regression. So that can also guide you to choose a good model. So here are my references. These are some of the papers. Maybe you can check and get more details with this. Otherwise, I think Yeah, I didn't talk about the Bayesian, which is, it seems it's more flexible, but I've not seen Bayesian logistic regression used. I've seen only an example in a paper, but it's a more flexible model. And some of the statisticians really recommend it as the best alternative model to use rather than the logistic itself. But as I've said, it's better to test all of them and see. Otherwise, thank you. This marks the end of my presentation. Thank you. And please, anyone who have questions or additions, please feel free to chip in. I see some things in the stats here, in the charts here. Let's see.
Hey, Edwin, congrats on the presentation. It was really, really informative. Thank you for having this.
Yes.
A final comment that totally agrees with your conclusion there. Like, we should always be mindful of those like rule of thumb. That is, if you have 10% prevalence, you should use this model. You should do this, do that. Often, just by selecting the model that we want to use or the variables that we want to use, we are already inflicting or adding bias to the results, and that is fine. That is part of this statistical analysis itself. We just need to be very clear on why we chose to do those things. And that's why we should always follow those good practices for reporting, like the stroke guidelines, the tripod guidelines that are always going to give you a really good walkthrough of how to do that, and also use our templates that we have at Gemini as well. But the final thing that I wanted to mention is it's really good to have all of those alternatives that you showed, but it's also important to be to think if our data or if our research question can be answered by that statistical model specifically. So you talked about some of those comp models with robust estimates and to try to control for the dispersion, but it's going to be hard for you to use them if you don't have time to event data. Like in our registries, like for KCMC, we have a bunch of those informations, like how long did the patient, how much time did it pass between the injury and arriving to KCMC? How much time between arriving to KCMC and going to surgery? So those things are really good and powerful so that we can model the data. So think about like we are like for the elderly trauma project that you and Nathan are working with, we could model the outcome, which is the elderly death, for instance, as a binomial, like dying and not dying, and try to think of like what a logistic model would tell us, what would be the odds ratio of dying if you are over the age of 80 or if you are 60 years old or something. But since we also have time to event, time to death, time to discharge, we can model this outcome and this analysis in this time to event form. So maybe like when you start with your research question, I guess it's a good starting point for you to think of, okay, from these 7 models or the 6 models that you showed us, maybe I can use 3 or 4 of them. So let's then test or let's see how it works. But I really think you did a great job. Ashley just commented how you were really clear on your slides and your presentation. And I really think you did a great job. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say that, of course, these approaches are more of a cross-sectional, and maybe it was if you are not maybe survival data, or if you have a question of survival, obviously it's you would use most commonly maybe the Cox or the Poisson. But if you have like you want just a cross-sectional data and you are trying to find maybe the risk but without time, you're not trying to worry about the time, but you just want the risk or the prevalence ratio. So this is the way to, maybe the approaches are the way to, yeah. Yeah, but good observation.
Very interesting, Edwin. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was amazing. It gave me an insight, and I don't expect you to answer. It was more like intrusive thought that I need to get out of my mind. I wonder if a zero inflated Poisson model would be useful to get this binomial distribution, since the zero inflated accounts for the zeros in a Poisson distribution and tries to model that and predict the zero, not the rest of the counting. And since the binomial uses 0, 1, if a zero inflated would be useful for that. And this is just a thinking, a thought, something like that. But I never seen any paper like this, so I don't know if you've seen it anything or if someone has seen it.
Yeah, maybe if someone has seen it. The zero inflated I've not seen, but I think if you use it, you'll always use it if you have, I think Joe is raised.
No, just you can finish. I can go next. You can finish.
Okay. I've seen it if you have so many zeros in your data, like, and you want to get a better estimate of it. So it can maybe like, sometimes with so many zeros, the model cannot converge. So I think it can help with the convergence, but I'm not sure if it can help in this other stuff. Yeah. But I feel like, yeah.
Sorry, I was gonna add to that the discussion about the inflated.
Please add.
And then Timothy, I am not the expert. I just done it for one study. But thank you for your words. What I was gonna say is that this model, what it's gonna do. So you already have the negative binomial, which is a good approach for overdispersion. So think about something like in our study for PRACT, the clinical trial, we have one of our analysis is the audit score, which is a score that goes from 9, I guess is the minimum, or no, I guess is, yeah, you can go from 0 to 44, I guess. So the majority of people are going to have very low scores, and a few patients are going to have high scores. So this is the dispersion. So whenever you do the negative binomial, you try to account for that. But the issue is that in our trial design, we are already working with a score that is over-dispersed. But what we want to see ideally is that after the intervention, so like after 3 months, 6 months, etc., these scores are going to tend to come to 0, because we want to make the patient to cause the patient to reduce their harmful alcohol use behavior. So this inflation, so we're going to have an excess of zeros after the intervention. It's going to be something that is going to totally mess up fitting the model. So what the zero inflated model does is that it creates a separate like coefficient for zeros. So basically, it's gonna try to remove this bias, remove this effect from the zeros from your data, in order for you to actually see how impactful, or measure how impactful your intervention or your event was in your population. So it's not necessarily only like, oh, I have a lot of zeros in my data, but you need to think that there is something happening in my population, in my cross-sectional data, in my cohort data, whatever, that is causing the data to become 0 or close to 0, or very small. And then it's a good opportunity for you to use that. We have used that for the first results from the PRACT study that is in process for publication now. And if you guys are curious, we can definitely share the link for the manuscript, and we can discuss about it in the future as well.
Bali, you want to talk?
Yeah, thank you. I was kind of late for this session and I regret that I couldn't but come at the time I came. Thank you very much, Edwin, for the presentation. Yeah, I have an issue about the 10% rule and the prevalence ratio versus odds ratio. Now, we realize that, or at least for me, I've noticed that most of the papers online that we want to critique in our discussion use odds ratio, even when we think that they would have used prevalence ratio. And because of that, and because we really want to critique in the light of prior publications, we may see ourselves compromising and using odds ratio, even though we know prevalence ratio should be what we should use here. So I'm throwing it to the house. What do we think is the best approach when we find issues like that? How do we deal with such issues?
Yeah, I would say strict statisticians would really disagree with you using the odds ratio for common outcomes. But maybe if you use odds ratio, maybe the interpretation would be you just give a caution maybe when you're publishing, so that it might not be a little bit misleading to maybe clinicians for us who are doing biomedical science or to the medical science community. Maybe I would say that's my thinking, that you should interpret with caution and also notify the audience.
Because it seems there is usually the issue of what is right versus what is quote unquote acceptable. So sometimes it really gets tricky.
And it's always going to depend as well on the reviewer that is seeing your manuscript, right? We understand that there's always room for discussion, for critique on one of such approaches. And it's always good when you get a reviewer that is going to look at your paper and say, oh, your paper is great, but I feel like you should change this modeling and see if it's better, or to be according that guideline. And this is a very good suggestion that is going to improve your manuscript and then your paper. And if they allow you to make those changes to a second, to a resubmission, that's great. But there are times that unfortunately people would see this as a major error that cannot be fixed and just deny your paper, or I guess that the majority of times is that the reviewers or the scientific community that works in the healthcare aspect overlooks these like best practices. So it's you probably would look at Gemini papers and see that we have made those mistakes in the past. And we should always be aware that coming, for the future, we should be aware of this. And that's why presentations like this one that Edwin brought to us are very important.
Yeah, I'm also interested to do if possible, one of the studies we do Bayesian logistic approach and see how it is, because I think it's really interesting. And yeah, just maybe if we can do one just for experience, maybe I think it's gonna be good.
Yeah, amazing. We're almost out of time, so I'm gonna wrap up. Thank you so much, everyone, for engaging and participating in the call. Thank you again, Edwin, for this amazing presentation. It gave us a lot of insights and a lot of information. Let's definitely schedule a Bayes 101 call. So next week, I think we still don't have anyone assigned to present. If anyone wants to present, let me know, or put yourself in the spreadsheet. And I'm gonna probably gonna be sending more frequent emails from now on about the meetings. So if you have any questions, any doubts and suggestions, don't hold yourself and reach out to me. Once again, thank you so much. Have a good rest of the week and a good weekend. We'll see soon.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you all.
Thank
Bye.
you so much.